Hi, I'm IKEA, and for today's video we're having a second in-depth look, this time into LMGs as the next one up. I've prepared a big spreadsheet of LMGs being on strikers, as I would think that is the most capable build for them. And we're going to go through most of the LMGs. I've again kept some out, a curated list with some of the damage talents, fast stands in there, some of the names, and all of the exotics are in there. And we're going to go through them on that specific build, and that will of course be our premise for it. So let's start there. And as with the other in-depth looks, this one is also predicated on a spreadsheet that I've prepared and that lives in the burst and sustain tables, and that is this LMG striker one. We've taken the stats and put them on a build. Now, with the ARs, it was very important actually to put them on a build because we had choices regarding the crit chance mods, because some of the better weapons had 2 crit chance mods, some of the other ones had 3. So we had to see it on a build to make sure that we knew what we were talking about. Here again, we have something similar, but also we have another item that we're going to alter between them. If I pull up the file, again, what we have as our conceits here are, we are setting the coyote to 15 to 25, and we are in fact using a coyote, because actually if we go to the build as is in game, and I bring that up, we see that I am going with a Cheska and a coyote mask. Now, this may seem odd because contractors seems like a really good pick for this. With coyote at 15 to 25, the coyote wins barely. So we're choosing that here. Although there is a really good case to be made to put in Cheska, a coyote, 2 crit chance mods, or no crit chance mods, and get coyote from somebody else, which can commonly happen, as a lot of people will still be running, of course, coyote for Elmos and other things. But I have chosen this one, and that is predicated on me thinking that this will be a much more general, available meta, and of course, as well, it is viable solo. Where actually the contractors, if you put in 1 or 2 crit chances into it with mods or the stats, and you take that solo, it actually loses out to this variant. So yeah, it is a conceit we're making here. It is very important that you know that. So the build really matters. I will actually likely make a second variant with the contractors, because of course DTA and contractors can be very powerful, but not more powerful than a coyote, turns out. Although, of course, that will actually decrease the effectiveness of strained, as everything, of course, cascades into each other. If we go back to our spreadsheet again, as well, everything is grade 25, as we have it here. We're choosing to have the numbers for 60 or 60% DTA, although we have no weapon that has DTA active here, so it is meaningless in this case. But we are taking 20% headshot, and I'm taking 20% headshot as I think that is good approximation of average play. In some cases you can do more, in some cases you can't even do 20%. So it's very dependent on what you're doing, and I think taking 20% as an average, we have to make a choice here, because if we put it at 100%, we are diminishing the effectiveness of critical hit damage as well, as it's additive to it. In effect as well, reducing the numbers we would get for strained and such. So I'm choosing 20% here. And as well, we have 2 different models, of course, for some weapons, some with 3 crit chance mods, some with 2 crit chance mods. Now, for the 3 crit chance mods, we are actually taking 1 crit chance on the gear, together with rate of fire as a 3rd stat. So I'm not going with crit chance as a 3rd stat, even though on a theoretical level that is better. Crit chance will, in most cases, beat rate of fire, except on strikers. If we turn everything crit damage and take the crit chance roll there, put in a Cheska piece, which also has a crit chance. If we don't go contractors, we actually land on, and we aren't here for the coyote, we're landing on 56.5. And 56.5 is a very awkward number for Coyote. It is just high enough that it's kind of interfering with the mid-range buff that it will receive. So instead, we're going rate of fire for these LMGs and taking a crit chance mod or a roll extra on the gear. And that is the case for all of the 3 mod weapons or 3 crit chance mod weapons. All of the 2 crit chance mod weapons actually perfectly, of course, align with having crit chance as a 3rd stat and leaving out that 1 mod or roll on the gear. So for those weapons, we are actually choosing to go with the crit chance 3rd stat, and that actually pushes them up quite a bit in this comparison. But of course, again, this is, I would consider, one of the better builds to have for LMGs anyway, so it is effective there. Also, we have these rate of fires with some of the weapons as they are applied there. That is, if they have a magazine that is large enough to use a rate of fire or rate of fire magazine or belt in this case, or pouch. Sometimes we can choose to do that. Now, of course, that takes your weapon from either going from 150 round mag for the M60s and such to 100 round mag for M60, M249, Negev. For instance, the MG5, we're not doing this. I don't think an MG5 is acceptable with a 50 round mag because it will just be beaten by L86. So we're only doing that for weapons where it can apply in a reasonable way, especially for instance, the GR9, which benefits a lot from it. So yeah, having discussed all of our choices here, let's actually go into the numbers. And yeah, all of that together goes into this a very big spreadsheet. One thing I want to as well just point out is that, of course, yeah, we're inputting the stats as they would be for the builds. So we're altering it for whenever, for instance, we have flatline, we would need to replace 1 crit chance mod. So in those cases, for instance, as well, the weapons go to crit chance being as their 3rd stat. We're dealing basically with them in the same way that we would for the weapons that have only 2 mods. Basically making the best build for that weapon. In the cases of the flatlines, in the cases of the weapons with 2 crit chance mods, so that is specifically the MG5 as it is in this list, and the classic M60. And the MG5 is differentiated from the infantry MG5 by the other one being infantry MG5. So those are treated differently, and same as well if for the exotics, we have altered the build and input the stats on the right side in that big yellow part to alter it to make the best build for that weapon. So we're giving it the best chances. Yeah, let's get up close and let's start off at the top. Carnage is at the top there. It's also a little bit misleading at the top there. That's why I'm kind of starting the entirety of the 100%, not being with the Carnage, but actually being 1 weapon below it. And that's because, of course, the Carnage is perfect sadist, and because of that, it does require more than all the other weapons to really get going. So you can't have perfect uptime on it usually, because there are things that just don't bleed. Warhounds, mini tanks, stuff like that. You can't make them bleed. So it becomes something that can't be active all the time. We're adding it in here still, though, because I wanted to have some of the names in here. And also this kind of shows how bad the Negev is, that with a perfect talent, giving it a 25% amp, it is barely beating out the L86. And that is our first real big winner here. The L86 is well known as being the best burster in the whole category of LMGs. Always has been. And of course, the entirety of the LMG category has not been changed in between, which I've already called out a few times as lazy, but I'll do here again. I think it's a little bit lazy. They should have balanced within the category as well, as it is a little bit needed, as we'll see as well as we go through it. As for instance, where the ARs are now kind of, most of the ARs, especially the ones that were already good and the ones that have been balanced, all of them kind of land together. The few that they forgot are way down below. That's only some work. But the LMGs are still very spread out because there is 2 really at the top. Starting off with here, L86 with Flatline. And of course, Flatline is a the most powerful talent that can really be generally used, because you can have the pulse from Technician. That's really all you need to get it going. So you can actually have it active for most of the engagement. And here we're taking it as our 100% point. So it's our 100% burst for this and 100% sustain. We are sorting for this first part, of course, with burst, and later on we're going to go to sustain. And the two at the top here are actually the two that will come up the most, I feel, which is the L86 and the RPK74. Both of them were already always pretty good on their burst and sustain. The RPK is a little bit worse on its burst, but much better on its sustain, meaning that they both kind of land around the same area. But to me, that extra 15 rounds that the RPK has, which of course leads to that better sustain, is to me the better choice. The L86 ends up that it just feels like a worse AR, but actually now, of course, with the buffs, it's better than the ARs. So it's the worst better AR? Question mark. But to me, the RPK is truly almost an LMG. It has 65 rounds. Those 15 rounds do matter, as we see as well with, for instance, with the higher mag ARs in the EB and the F2000s. They're doing really well because of that. Another factor is that the RPK always has a little bit shorter of a reload. The L86, to me, really needs either to be the tabula rasa or it needs to be fast hands. The RPK is at the edge of what I find acceptable, and that, of course, is different per person. So you have to kind of make those kind of decisions for yourself. Both come highly recommended, especially with fast hands, as we'll go into in a little bit. Then, of course, we have L86 with strained here, as we're going into the strained. And in the LMG category, there's not going to be any optimists because the RPMs are pretty low for the LMGs. The highest one being a Negev with also rate of fire mag, reaching this 1063. That still, of course, will not make Optimus viable because also the LMGs have a much higher firing time because they have a much bigger mag, feeding into strained much better, and strained will be the pick as our general damage talent for all of them. But often wise as well, I will actually prefer fast hands for my LMGs. Yeah, let's continue on as we land on the MG5. The first time it will show its face here. The MG5 is, this one is the one with only 2 mods, so not the infantry one. And especially with strained, especially for this setup, actually does work quite well. Because we can take that crit chance, we're missing 1 crit chance mod, so we can actually take that crit chance 3rd stat, and then take away the mod that we were using to get our crit chance above the 50 that we would need for the Coyote to take us to 60. And that kind of lines up well, actually, with this setup. Now, this is, of course, this setup, going the Cheska chest, going the Coyote. And that is the thing. Depending on the build, we might be better off with some weapons or others, but I think as the general choice makes sense to me, at least. It is the build that most people will already have for ARs. And we basically are setting it up in the same way that we would for high-end ARs and just taking a rate of fire 3rd stat LMG on it. In this case, though, we're taking a crit chance 3rd stat MG5 and leaving out that 1 mod. And that kind of, yeah, bumps it up a little bit higher than the rest. Next up as well, we have the RPK. So kind of this L86 to RPK with the 3 strains coming in here. Those really look good. I should note as well that, of course, you need a long rail for flatline. The MG5s don't have that. That's why they aren't showing up here with flatline. Also, even with the L86s, there is the custom that has it, not the other one. The military doesn't have it. Yeah, that's why we will actually be excluding some weapons. For instance, the MG5 from flatline, even though it could kind of make sense, even though the reload is a little bit long, but that's why they're not in there. Also, I'm making specifically choices. Some weapons are missing here. We won't be having the Stoner at all, as I think it's just not worth having in this list to just make it longer. I'm not going for the most complete list. I'm going for the most useful list personally. Then we have actually the Carnage as we have it here. So first off, it was with a rate of fire magazine. Now we have to make note that the rate of fire is going to affect the burst, but is also going to not matter here when we're sorting by burst to its sustain, because the sustain is getting altered by that rate of fire mag. We're giving up some of the sustain for some burst. This side of the things, of course, doesn't show it. That's why we also do sustain calculations, because otherwise, yeah, you would pick the rate of fire mag for all of them. And one of the reasons that we haven't seen any of the other ones show up yet is, yes, of course, the other ones can't yet, because it's only available for the pouch LMGs. But once we start going into some of the pouch LMGs, as we start seeing coming up, they're all going to first show up with the rate of fire mag and then as their normal mag. But of course, that is a price that you still pay. There is a price in sustain that you pay and in damage per mag. The Iron Lung shows up afterwards. The Iron Lung, of course, didn't get the 20%, but only 10%. And that kind of shows. I wouldn't pick it for its damage. Its status effect, its fire, once it fires half a mag, is interesting, can be useful, and I quite enjoy it as well, actually, for instance, with Ongoing Directive. But as the general damage dealer, just because it didn't get the same damage buff as everything else, it really doesn't make much sense. Also, for all of the LMGs, we'll be picking crit chance as their third stat. That is the other bracketing that is there, showing what is their third stat. So Iron Lung looking pretty good, and it's still pretty high up here, of course. But yeah, it's no longer the damage king of LMGs. That really goes to a talented L86 or RPK. Now, of course, this does it always, which is quite powerful. It's doing it from the first shot. It doesn't need to stack from like with strain. So even if you're firing 10 rounds, you're still getting out this damage, where, of course, this strain is averaging out and complete firing of the entire magazine, and then averaging that out over the bullets. So you kind of need to be unloading quite a bit, or at least going pretty far into each magazine that you're firing to get these strain numbers out. That's just a conceit of strained. This Iron Lung also, of course, just doing it. And that still means that it's likely on average, especially if you're not firing out continuous rounds or continuous mags with maybe some of the easier content, the Iron Lung is perfectly fine as a pick. But of course, in general play, if you actually want to use it, that 85 magazine is atrocious and kind of sucks and doesn't feel enjoyable to play. Next up comes one of my other favorites, is the Infantry MG5. My picks usually for LMGs is Infantry MG5 or RPK. And part of that is that the Infantry MG5 always competes favorably as well with even the RPKs and the L86s, because it is, while it is behind, it is just a little bit behind. It doesn't actually, the interesting thing is that it doesn't actually even, without fast hands, it doesn't actually compete even on sustain with even the RPK and such, because even though they have a smaller mag, they also have much better reloads. One thing the MG5 as well has is that it has 20% on both the Infantry MG5 and the normal MG5, it has 20% headshot more than all the other LMGs in the category. This has been a remainder from when it got introduced, when it got introduced in Division 1, actually, where it had that. And when it got carried over into Division 2, it retained it for some reason. So yeah, it has 105 headshot on a base build instead of the 85 that other weapons would have. That picks it up a little bit, even with this 20% headshot damage. Actually, if you put the headshot rate, or 20% headshot rate, if you put at 100% headshot rate, the MG5, of course, leaps up quite a bit because it just has 20% headshot more. Then we have the Negevs, but here with the rate of fire mags. We're not taking the MG5s with the rate of fire mags. The 50 rounds MG5 just doesn't make sense to me. It would also be very low. While high on burst, they of course jump up on their burst. I don't think it's even fair to even think of them like that. So I'm just leaving those out. But here the Negevs with a rate of fire are starting to show up. They are actually decently high on the burst, especially with that rate of fire mag. And they have actually a decent enough rate of fire exceeding even stuff like the Elmo and such, meaning that you could maybe use this, and the Negev might have some use here, even though it is a lot behind on burst for stacking, because if you can stack faster, we're using strikers. If you stack faster, you'll get to your damage faster. But I would still pick the RPK and just stack with the ACS a little bit first. That is my pick, really. The RPK is fast enough to make it there. Then we start getting into the M249s, which are 3 variants. There's the M249 Tactical, the normal one, and then the Mark 46. All of them as well, again, with Flatline showing up first, because of course it does. Flatline will exceed Strained still, because Strained in this is usually between 10 to 13%-ish per weapon. It is a lot. It is a lot more than ARs, of course, but still will be behind Flatline. And next up, we have the Classic M60. The Classic M60, we're treating it in the same way as the MG5. So it has only 2 mod slots for crit chance, where in the Strained one, we're using both of them as crit chance. With the Flatline one, we're actually going with 1 crit chance and 1, of course, with a pulse laser, just for the Flatline, just to make Flatline actually work the way we would usually want it, because if you don't have that, you could account for somebody else pulsing or such. I don't find that viable. But here's the only place as well that Strained will actually beat Flatline, because we have to flip, of course, 1 crit damage to a crit chance to make up for that mod lost on the weapon. And Strained is not behind enough that it would lose still at that point. So this is the one place where Strained will likely beat Flatline. As well, with the Classic M60s, we're going with a crit chance 3rd stat, because yeah, we have 1 crit chance mod less, so we can actually do that. Then we see the first of the fast hands. The L86 is showing here already, and the MG5 and RPK with fast hands are not far behind. This as well will be the place where we start to speed up, because most of the weapons that are beyond this point, I don't find worth using, because if you can have an RPK or L86 with fast hands that have much higher sustain as well because of that fast hands, and then also have higher burst than, for instance, a Negev with Flatline. Why use the Flatline Negev when you could have the L86? You're bursting the same and you're sustaining much, much higher. So from this point onward, it starts to get a little bit bad for some of the weapons. And this is the reason why I really wanted some inter LMG balancing to be done. Because to me, the L86 and the RPK could have gone with 15%. And some of the other weapons a little bit more than 20%, maybe even. Because once the RPK, for instance, especially here as my pick, with fast hands shows up and is at 86% of the burst of that L86 there, and a much higher, much higher sustain, it takes away some of the viability of the following weapons. One standout here as well is actually the new Reliable. I can definitely recommend this weapon as well. On especially the premise that if you don't per se need the sustain that you would need, for instance, for some content, if you're tryharding, you might go with RPK with fast hands. The new Reliable is so much easier to use. You have another 30% weapon handling together with the 15 from strikers already, and your watch points, making for a really accurate and easy to use weapon, making it a general pick, kind of Elmo-ish in its nature. So yeah, the new Reliable, definitely one that I would definitely recommend trying out. One thing to note here as well, because we're going into some of the bigger mag LMGs in a second, as we're scrolling down. Steady-handed, of course, can be a choice. What steady-handed would be, if you conceive it as being triggered every time, basically, which, for instance, with the GR9, with its 200 round mag, you only have to hit 100 times. It's conceivable and actually pretty practical. What that would mean is that you would basically take the fast hands number. So, for instance, we would take the GR9 with the rate of fire mag with fast hands, which I'm trying to quickly find, but of course, when you're trying to find something quickly, it is always the furthest away. Because here's the, here it is, actually. It was behind my head, a little, or well, next to my head, so I wasn't looking there. But then the burst would become its sustain. That is, that is basically how that works. Its burst number would become its sustain number. So it would be sustaining for 11 million. And that is actually pretty high, because even if we go all the way back up into the top, even one of the higher sustainers in the RPK is actually only sustaining 10 million. But of course, it's not bursting as well. So that's the trade-off. You give up a lot of burst, and you try to make up for it by having a very high sustain. That, though, is not always practical, as sometimes you can't hit, get it to hit 200. Sometimes you just need to suppress or something as well. And yeah, that weapon, while seeming good, just this lack of burst on it. Again, this needed to be altered within the class. This class as a whole needed the same rebalance kind of that ARs and SMGs got. And sadly, it didn't, so kind of sad for that. We're going to go through some of the others quickly, because, yeah, we're going to basically show up again with the rate of fires and the strained showing up first, and then the strained variant showing up, because, of course, these are burst tables, where the fast hands, of course, isn't adding into it. And then we're going into having the fast hands with rate of fire, and then the fast hands without the rate of fire mag. And it is a list that should seem familiar, because it is basically the same as the burst and sustain tables as they are without including a build. Because for a lot of it, it is all weapons that have 3 mods for crit chance. We're altering out the mag between plus 50 or having the rate of fire mag. And yeah, it just goes down that list, basically. A lot of them, I would basically say, are not relevant, just because the Infantry MG5, the MG5, the RPK, and the L86 are so dominant in this category. So even though they have better firing times, with some sole standouts, as we'll go into in sustain, with really only one in the good times, I wouldn't pick them, which is kind of sad. But of course, the whole list is available. You can go through it at your own leisure. I'm trying to catch if there's any names in there. There isn't. We'll move on into towards the end of the list, where we'll see the blue screen. And yeah, the blue screen doesn't have a damage component to its talent, meaning that this is basically what we get. Of course, it does have a utility talent, but it is pretty far low on the burst. It is usable for its talents. That disrupt, and especially the disorient part of it, can sometimes be useful, especially in Countdown. I've seen people make decent use of it, but it just, yeah, it hurts a little bit. Bullet King is pretty low on the burst, because its burst is its sustain, and its sustain is okay, but not its burst. This is the reason why we don't use Bullet King, and this is, of course, Bullet King with getting this crit chance third stat here available to it. It's still not very usable. It is, of course, very high on its sustain, and we can already peek ahead at the sustain table and see that it's at the top there. That still isn't going to save it. I would still pick other weapons over it, just because it just doesn't have the oomph to really go. It is a utility weapon in its ammo, especially for the group. But yeah, I wouldn't pick it. And last, and sadly maybe least, the Pestilence didn't get any increase. So for instance, the Blue Screen and the Bullet King still did get increases. The Pestilence got no increase. I'm going to speculate here that that is because they maybe thought that together with Lengmo getting altered to be 30 LMG and Pestilence being, you know, reliant on weapon damage, maybe that some cheesing would happen there. I can tell you that this is supermarket cheese. And this is, you know, this isn't Parmigiano Reggiano. This is just, you know, just cheap cheese from the store. It's kind of not worth it anymore. It is so far behind that while I love the Pestilence, and we will definitely visit it as a build showcase at some point, it is too low to be usable. Let's go on to the sustain table. And after all that, we arrive at the sustain tables, which are right below it, of course. We are again actually not picking the top weapon as the percentage point to have everything compare against, because there is, of course, one here at the top. Although, actually, is it that at the top? Because it is only 3% ahead of the RPK, and that is, of course, the Bullet King, which should be actually the Sustain King. But even with 1,000 mag and 0 reload, yes, it isn't that far ahead. And of course, it's 15% behind on burst. This is the reason why you don't pick the Bullet King. Even though it can be handy, it can be fun, a case can be made that not reloading ever can maybe save your life here and there. 15% more burst will kill everything else, will unsave everybody else's lives, and that's so much that, yeah, you can't ignore that. And yeah, we are going to compare everything to the RPK, and this is the RPK that's why I picked the RPK, as with fast hands, it is at the top of this table. One thing I want to note here as well, which is kind of nice for the RPK and L86, where, especially with the other LMGs, you really do want to have Gunner there for the big pouch. Even though you might choose to sometimes go with the plus rate of fire pouch, having access to the plus 50 mag, plus 50 round pouch is quite handy at times. But of course, the RPK and L86 don't have that. They have the big magazine, so you can take them on Demolitionist, on Survivalist, on other Technician, any of the specs that you like. And that is actually sometimes quite valuable, because while Gunner is pretty good solo, it actually isn't that great in groups. Having 5% detox spread over 3 other players is a lot more powerful than that little bit of weapon handling that 1 in 3 reloads being a lot faster, especially if you're running fast hands, and the rate of fire buff that you get after kill. And same, for instance, for flame grenades being really powerful, flashbangs being really powerful, plus the stability there cannot be discounted for sharpshooter. So yeah, RPKs and L86s also just don't lock you into one specialization. Here we have also one of the other standouts on sustain, although very low on their burst. This I would pick over a Bullet King every day, because especially as we see here, a rate of fire, fast hands, perfect fast hands, good times, will outburst a Bullet King by quite a bit. 4% is nothing horrendous. It will keep up on the sustain, being only a few percentage, or well, 8% behind. But a weapon that is much harder hitting. And that most of it is down to, of course, as well, to that it can have the 3 crit chance mods, so it can actually have the rate of fire third stats, which is how they're actually in here. And yeah, that is that is not unbeatable, because the Bullet King does compete with it. But I would pick the good times over it. The ammo from the Bullet King could only be that it's only the ammo that you get from it could be the only remaining argument that someone can make. And then actually as well, on sustain, we see as well that the RPK with flatline is actually really high up here. It is actually, because its reload isn't atrocious, it's still actually, it outbursts basically a lot of the contenders in here. And then its sustain is still pretty high up here. An RPK with flatline is also very much something I would say is worth considering. I'll be picking fast hands, or I'll be picking new reliable personally. Then as well, we have the MG5s, the non-infantry ones showing up here, and a little bit later, the infantry MG5s. The infantry MG5s having a little bit more of the magazine size, especially over the RPK, does make it so that you much more consistently will actually hit the cap of their reload, or of fast hands. Where, while we are calculating here the fast hands with it being the max average that this weapon would have, that isn't really how it ends up in the game, of course, because out of those 65 rounds, you might not hit all 65, where if you have 100 rounds and you then hit 65 rounds, You get the same reload bonus, basically, although, of course, the reload of the MG5 is much higher. But actually, the standout to me here as well is the MG5. So because we can take that crit chance third stat with it so much more reliably, and then put fast hands on it with 2 crit chance mods, and the third stat being crit chance for it, where, for instance, with the Infinity MG5, we're going with rate of fire, 3 crit chance mods on the weapon itself, and then flipping 1 crit damage to crit chance, because that is the best layout for it. But because this one has its extra damage in its base, and we can kind of line it up better, it actually comes out ahead. So I'll actually be grabbing a few of these MG5s with fast hands, RPKs with fast hands. The other one as well, of course, as a standout, because it is so high on the burst stables and then a little bit lower on the sustain tables, is the L86. But yeah, to me, I would pick an RPK over an L86, but I can see the argument for it as well with its highest burst. The classic M60 starts showing up, especially with the rate of fire mag with fast hands, is pretty good. Although actually as well, next to it is the strain one. They're lining up pretty well on their sustain, just because the 150 round mag, one of them is with rate of fire magazine, the other is without, with the plus 50 mag. They're lining up pretty close to each other, and the burst, of course, of the strained one is much higher. So actually a classic M60 with strained does seem like a decent idea, because of course the other one was competing with the good times, which is much higher. A little bit of the same burst levels, but then much better sustain. And then, yeah, we start going into the weeds. We have also here the GR9. The GR9 we could consider being with steady-handed. That would keep it at the same burst. It would basically make its burst its sustain. So we would take this 10,651 that does burst. If we compare that, that would actually put it at the top of the sustain table. That's also why I didn't put it in as is, because I don't consider steady-handed to be always activatable. It would show up, just below the Bullet King, really. But you can always, approximate steady-handed by just taking whatever burst number the weapon has with fast hands, or with no talent, because no damage talent, I should say, because of course it doesn't apply into the burst fast hands. So you can take that fast hands number, the burst number there, the absolute value, and just compare it like that. I felt if I would put the steady-handeds in here, they would overshadow basically everything else, but they're also not completely reliably there, especially for the weapons that have a 100-round magazine, where you have 100 rounds to make 100 hits. You can reload in between, of course, here and there. You will retain your steady-handed, but on a theoretical level, I'm not comfortable with that. If we then move on, we have a few of the others showing up as well. All of the big mags are showing up first without the rate of fire mags, because of course that rate of fire mag is at the cost of a 50-round mag, and because of that, it actually decreases their sustain by quite a lot. That's why they're so much higher on burst, but then actually they lose out on sustain by too much. That's why quite often we do pick to go with the plus 50-round mag. The only places I would choose to maybe not do so is really starting at the Mark 46s, MT49s and the M60s basically. They can get away with it with certain talents, having a 100-round mag, and that 5% rate of fire is of course pretty good. And we keep going and going, especially for instance here as well, the L86 with flatline is a note to make, as the reload being so much longer for the L86 is hurting it here a lot, putting it very low on the sustain. It looks really nice on its burst, but it just is falling so far behind on sustain that I would pick an RPK with flatline, as it is a much narrower band. It is lower on its burst, but it makes up for it just because its sustain isn't as atrocious. Any other standouts? Not particularly. Of course, all of the fast hands are more at the top. The flatlines are in the middle. The strains are way around the end. But also, we're ending up here, while we had the Bullet King all the way at the top. The other 3 exotics are very much here at the bottom. All 3 of them kind of losing out just because they have no crit chance on the weapon themselves. If they had a little bit more crit chance, because in this case we have to pick a crit chance third, with some of them we also still have to flip a one crit chance or one crit damage to crit chance on the gear itself. The blue screen and the Iron Lung, especially of course, yeah, the Iron Lung doing decently well on burst, but yeah, it's falling so far away on sustain. And to me, even beyond sustain, the discussion is how long do you have while you can reload? This humongously long reload after each 85 rounds, to me, is unattainable. You'll get killed in this. You will have to roll and reset it a few times. You might be under attack by a rusher or something. Now, of course, there are ways to mitigating that. You have a pistol, pull that out, or a secondary weapon. But it will get you killed here and there. And we have something that I'm going to guess will be staying unique in as we'll go through ARs and SMGs and every other weapon type, is that there is one weapon at the very end of the burst and sustain tables. Even with the ARs, while the SIG was very low, the M4 and the Carbine are actually below it in the sustain tables, and then the SIG is at the end at the burst tables. The Pestilence here is at the bottom of both lists. It could use a buff, and I think it should. Well, it does have a damage component to its talent, of course, where, for instance, the Iron Lung and... well, the Iron Lung technically does as well with its fire, but it's minimal. The blue screen really doesn't, and for instance, of course, the Bullet King doesn't at all. It is a utility talent all the way through. The Pestilence, of course, does have damage towards its talent. You would need it to tick for 3-4 million to kind of catch up on the burst versus some of these other weapons. It would need to tick for 4-5 million sustain-wise to make up for how lackluster the sustain is here. Because, of course, if that tick isn't, if the debuff isn't good enough, yeah, what is the value of this? The Pestilence needs a buff. Hashtag justice for Pestilence, and hopefully they will actually still add it in. Yeah, let's go on to the conclusion. And to conclude this video, we'll do the same thing that we did with the ARs. I'm just going to go through the list and basically give my opinions. Starting out with the blue screen, it is not good enough on its damage to make its talent viable. Well, the talent is kind of nice and can be used in some cases. For instance, in Countdown, I've seen people make creative use of it, especially with its disorient and such, especially during extraction. It isn't that high in its damage to be worthwhile using. Moving on to the Bullet King, even if you put the crit chance third stat here, there are a bunch of weapons that will outdo it. Now, there is an ease of use with the Bullet King that is undeniable, and of course, its group mechanic of every 100 bullets that hit an enemy replenish some ammo to you and your allies' reserves can be handy for some things. I don't see myself using it. Iron Lung is still good. It is actually still very powerful because even though it is a little bit lower on the burst tables now than it used to be, it is still from the first shot. It is actually just doing that damage without any caveats. There is no stacking up strains. There is no doing things like Sleipnir in a second. Especially with the crit chance third, which it already could have. It is pretty powerful. I will find myself using this on my ongoing directive builds and such. And yeah, as we talked about Pestilence without a buff is a little sad. It's making very sad noises in the corner, and we'll just leave it in that corner all alone until it gets some buffs, and we might come back for it, which is sad because I really do enjoy the Pestilence. Its talent is fun enough that I feel it should, be viable, and it needs a buff. So yeah, hashtag buffs for the bestie. Yeah, we need not some skulls for the Skull Throne. We need some buffs for the Nurgle King. Moving on, we have actually one that we didn't discuss much in the tables. It is in there under Perfect Unhinged. The Black Friday, Perfect Unhinged just isn't worth it, especially not in the conceits that we had there, which is everything being graded to 25. That, of course, is already weapon damage, taking the weapon damage pretty up high, and this 22 weapon damage on top of that at some cost as well is not the choice to go for. But in general as well, even without grade to 25, I would pick strained over it. There is, of course, that this is always active as well. There is that conceit, but I personally would pick basically just strained or flatline, which is also active from the first shot. Moving on, the M60s are decent, but especially for good times. Good times is a standout in especially fast hands because, of course, it is perfect fast hands, and perfect fast hands is pretty perfect. The weapon, though, that is on M60 is decent, but not good. RPKs are personally, for me, my top pick. They will also be very much used because they will not be tied to any specialization, where, for instance, to me, especially the Infantry MG5, one of my other top picks, does require gunner for the plus 50 mag, and especially the MG5 does really need it because it's a 50 round mag. Moving on to the Carnage, as we saw, it is okay because of a plus 25 amp. If you can have that amp up, it is actually a decent choice, but the Negev that it's on, the base weapon of it, is not worth it, really. Classic M60 as well, kind of not worth it. It is a mid-tier, kind of suffering in the same ways as the other M60s, but it doesn't have a perfect in the good times to make up for it. Going to the RPKs, just to explain here as well, as the difference between there are three types of RPK. There's the black market, there's the classic, and then there's the military all the way down here. The difference between them is in a slight increase in their or decrease in their stability, meaning that they have a little bit more recoil. The classic having the worst recoil upward, the military having the in-between, and the black market being the better one. So if you can go with one, go with the black market. If you have a really good-looking classic, it is not the end of the world. Their differences between them are noticeable, but not the biggest change maker. You can definitely learn to run a classic M60 or a classic RPK. Moving on to the L86s, there's two L86s. I just wanted to point out as well that, this is the custom L86. This one does have a long rail. The military L86 does not have a long rail. That is actually a very important difference if you do want to go flatline with them. Also, the custom L86 has a little bit better handling characteristics just on the stats, making it my pick, really. But especially with fast hands. Then we have the good times, the standout for its perfect fast hands. I feel this is very much usable. You're giving up quite a bit of burst for a decent, effective sustain, and the reload on it is very survivable because you can really quickly reload. It is really one of my picks, and there is some value to firing time as well. And especially with a 150 round mag on this, it of course will continuously fire for a lot longer, meaning that you will not be caught out as much by having to go into reload in between enemies. The GR9, and as you see here, I have three variants with it. With steady-handed, I would definitely go with steady-handed for it, and then try to find one that you can change the third stat on. It is very good with steady-handed, as if you can get it going, and there are some contents where you definitely can get it going, its burst becomes basically its sustain. At that point, it is one of the top sustainers. Is that viable for every content? No. But for instance, for heroic countdown, where there's a lot of enemies that you can shoot at for quite a long while, it isn't a bad choice. But an RPK with fast hands or an L86 with fast hands would outdo it still, though. Then we have the infantry MG5s, which are very much one of my classic users. They are high enough on their burst and both on their sustain. They really need to have fast hands. They don't have enough ammo. They have a 100 round mag cap, meaning that they cannot really work well with steady-handed in my experience. And that makes them really good with fast hands, and they are very much up there because they do have a little bit longer firing time, meaning that you can do more damage before you have to reload. And sometimes that is worthwhile because one of the things that MG5 really, for me, is a standout in, especially in challenging countdown, usually in one mag with some allies around me, of course, as well. The Hunter will go down, and I don't have to hit a reload, personally. The negevs, as we saw, are pretty low on the burst and sustains. They are basically mid-tiers. They are one of the better ones with 150 round mag, especially if you have a rate of fire on it as a stat and a rate of fire mag, and then take it with strikers. You do get a really high rate of fire, which if this had the rate of fire mag, it would actually be 1063 as I'm peeking over there. That is actually pretty high and way high enough that you can actually stack for strikers with it. So there is a case to be made for it there. But again, I would actually stack maybe with the ACS and then swap over and do much more damage with an RPK. The M249s, together with its variants in the tactical version and in the military Mark 46, all three of them are basically the same as the M60s. They are mid-tiers. They don't carry themselves well enough to be worthwhile. I would actually pick a GR9 with steady-handed, maybe over these. They are still effective enough to use, but yeah, not good picks. And yeah, one standout we saw, and one that I will be making use of, especially with a crit chance third stat, so we can go with 2 crit chance mods and a fast hands. That's going to actually be likely one of my picks, one of my main picks for LMGs, especially if I have Gunner on strikers. As we saw, they line up quite a bit better build-wise with strikers, just because they have one mod slot less, making them much more effective to go crit chance third stat with. And they have a little bit higher base damage to make up for that. And of course, that base damage went up by 20%, which, because every weapon went up from an absolute value by 20%, the M6, the classic M60 and MG5 actually benefited more so than most other weapons. And yeah, it will be my go-to pick, I feel, for a lot of uses. This and the RPK, and in some cases the L86 are my 3 picks. Moving on, yeah, we spoke already about the military L86. The custom is the better version if you can get it. If you can't, this is perfectly fine if you have a good one of these lying around. The military M60 is the same as the classic M60, but just a little tiny bit worse, which is just going to always be the case between military versions and black market versions. Usually the black market versions are the best ones, and usually they have a little bit less recoil. That is usually what they have. The damage is the same between all of them. They all have the same base damage. They all have the same rate of fire, so their burst and sustain stays the same. Moving on to, yeah, one of the standouts as well is the new reliable. This 30 weapon handling, especially with strikers, makes for a very comfortable weapon, rivaling the Almo very much. With 3 crit chance mods and a rate of fire third stat, it fits in really well in strikers, as we had it there, and yeah, it can make for a really comfortable weapon. When you don't need that all-out damage, it is very comfortable to go with. If you need a little bit more, I would maybe then step over to fast stance RPK. But perfectly good, and actually one of the higher numbers. We have one that I didn't include, and I intentionally didn't include, but I do want to talk about it here, Sleipnir. Sleipnir, of course, is Perfect Frenzy, and Perfect Frenzy and Frenzy itself is a very powerful talent. But it is too conditional for me to add into the list like these. Same why we'll not have Killer really in the SMGs coming up or in the ARs that we had. While they are perfectly fine talents, Perfect Frenzy here as well, if you prep it and then go into a boss fight, for instance, and then use it, it is very powerful, but you have to prep it. So if I put the numbers up there with it always active, it looks way too strong. With it, like, trying to average it out for usage, it becomes meaningless, because how do you even do that? So I'm just sidestepping the whole thing and just leaving it out and just going like, It's good if you stack it. So it is very powerful. It would top the burst stable by around 50%, 42% above everything else. So that's why we left it out there. And yeah, it is situationally very useful. You could have this very much as your secondary, having it prepped, going into a room and then using it, having it be ready at its reload. So you reload and then start firing it. One that we left out, and I said that at the start as well, but we'll discuss it here again, is the Stoner. The Stoner to me is just the worst GR9, and I didn't want it clogging up the list with 4 or 6 of its variants in there. It is very much a weapon that I would not recommend, partially as well as once you go onto a build with it, it becomes even worse for it, because the Stoner still has it that your muzzle is locked to this plus 20 stability muzzle. Meaning that it is basically a 2 crit chance weapon, even though it looks like it has 3 crit chance mods available to it. It only has 2. Together with all of its other stats means that it's going to lose against the GR9 in all ways. And it isn't meaningfully better in any way. Which is sad. I like the way it looks. So, and of course, Stoner as a great name in weapon making, but yeah, they did them dirty here. This Tabula Rasa is also one to maybe consider, same as, of course, the steady-handed ones. This is the perfect steady-handed. You will have to reload once to hit this, and awkwardly, the second one is in the middle of your second magazine, if you're hitting all of your shots. But what ends up happening is that you usually hit this at the mid to end parts of your second magazine, and get a free reload out of it. And one free reload once in a while is pretty powerful, and this accuracy stability adds quite up. One thing I dislike always with this, and steady-handed as well, is the moment that it falls away, especially for those that have descended and have used steady-handed in there. You might know that if you're rocking unhinged and steady-handed in there, the moments that steady-handed falls away are very awkward. Minimally so here, but still very awkward. And yeah, we've already discussed the M249s as being mid-tierers, actually below the M60s, I would say. So yeah, that was very much all of the LMGs. I hope that they actually will revisit the LMGs and maybe change the interbalance between them. I would very much say that, yeah, RPKs, L86s, and MG5s and infantry MG5s are the go-tos and are very powerful. We'll continue on with the next one being about SMGs, and we will likely afterwards, after that in a video, compare all 3 in a combined list, as once we have the SMGs as well, we can basically put all 3 in one list and have a little gander at how far ahead are LMGs now and are they kind of worth it. I'll give a sneak peek that RPKs and L86s do already beat some of the top-end ARs, but of course they come at some cost, as they have suppression mechanics, and also you can't use a shield with them. So that's gonna come up in slightly a few days, and we're going to end it up here by me saying, as always, have a good night.